Hi, everybody. Good morning and welcome to technically day 5 of the CoreNet conference. Today we have Padma Priya from Sahapedia with us, who will walk us through a really interesting and maybe a slightly different sort of showcase or topic that we haven't engaged with thus far. So we're all quite excited about it. So it's about a review of the budgetary trends in India's arts and culture section. Thus far, we have, of course, focused on other pertinent issues like migration or nutrition, health, gender, sexual reproductive health. And we thought that maybe it'd be interesting to also have a look at what other sectors might be going through during this really tough time. So we're really excited that we could have Sahapedia team kind of put together this showcase for us. Just before we jump in, I decided to go over a few ground rules. We are recording this session for the purpose of documentation and dissemination. So please do let us know by the chat if you'd not like to be recorded or quoted. In the interest of active consent seeking, we will be removing all AI note takers from the call. I just going back to check, we don't actually have any right now, so we're good. To save bandwidth on the call, please turn off your camera and keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. But of course, feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video in case you wish to make a comment or ask a question. Amongst all of us here, we're comfortable in Hindi and English, so please feel free to speak or ask a question in either of those two languages. And if you do need help with translation, many of us are happy to help with that as well. Please use the chat box to leave your comments and questions. And it would be great if you could introduce yourself and your organization along with it, so it's easier for the presenters to kind of contextualize your question. And of course, please keep us on time. The sessions are parallelly programmed. So at 12 p.m., we do have another session that's planned with Jan Sahas, and I'll give more details about that towards the end of the session. But try and keep us within the hour limit. And of course, if there are things you want to discuss in greater length, feel free to reach out to us or Padma Priya or anyone else on the Sahapedia team offline and after this session. Just a quick introduction about CoreNet. The COVID-19 Research Network, or as we call CoreNet, is an effort to build a community of practice to foster exchange and collaboration among research organizations, gathering information on issues relevant to COVID-19 pandemic in India. It is being anchored by Quicksand and supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I'm Nitya and I'm from Quicksand. I'm a design researcher, and over the last year or so, actually perhaps a little bit more than a year now, we've sort of been engaging with different members, we've been facilitating different discussions, we've been organizing research, and that's kind of what the role Quicksand has been playing thus far. Over the past year, we have managed to gather about 60 plus research organizations working across 23 geographies. We have more than 200 individual members on the Slack workplace. We have more than 80 submitted research projects that have been uploaded on the web platform, which is www.corenet.in. I will just share a link to that in the chat box once I'm done. And in an effort to kind of engage with the different community members as well as stakeholders, we organize sort of events. We've had 19 coffee hour sessions thus far and 13 ethics dialogues. And this is the first sort of large-scale conference. And we thought after about a year, it would be a good time to kind of come back together as a community and just discuss what we've learned in the last year, what are future directions, and where do we go from here. And it just seems like this is coming at the most apt time where we seem to be going into the second wave. I mean, we very much are in a second wave, which seems to be more detrimental than the first. So we thought it'd be a good time to put all of our heads together and see where we could really, what could be future directions and what are all the learnings that we have learned along the way. Just a quick look at the agenda before I officially hand it over to Padma Priya. We're at about 5 minutes of the introduction, after which Padma Priya will walk us through a presentation, and then we usually like to keep question and answers towards the end. So try not to kind of interrupt the speaker whilst they're going through their presentation, unless of course there's something extremely pressing, and you can feel free to write that in the chat box. And we'll take all our comments and discussions towards the end, the 25 minutes we have at the end. And a quick introduction to Padma Priya. Padma Priya is a dancer, actress, public policy worker, gender and environmental activist, and she's been juggling these different passions for more than 2 decades. At Sahapedia, she is leading the work on mapping the cultural traditions, arts and heritage of the Indian cities, and hopes to build frameworks for cultural policy making. She's been trained at NYU and NLS Bangalore. And with that, over to you, Padma Priya.
Thanks, Nitya. Big hello to everyone. Thanks for joining in. It's really trying times that we are in. I'm here representing Sahapedia, and myself and my colleague Mansi actually put together a review of budgetary trends in India's art and culture sector. This is one of its first of its kind. There's very limited data about art and culture, and so I'm very thankful to Nitya and CoreNet for actually bringing this on board, this conversation. So it was also a first-time experiment for us to be bringing together a report of this kind. But we also thought it was critical to do this. What was happening in the background of the pandemic is that the sector itself, beyond cinema and radio and a few other sectors, the art and culture itself is a very fragile sector, which includes a huge diversity when it comes to India. And we saw a lot of efforts from our colleagues in the sector coming together and raise funds for a lot of performers, especially oral tradition performers who are there in your villages, in your homes, in temples. And we thought it was essential, while there was one organization, ACRI, FICCI, and British Council that was putting together and understanding the impact of COVID on livelihoods. We thought it was also important to understand what is the role of government in polity and what is the sense of responsibility and response that we are getting from them. And therefore, we started very simple analysis of the budgetary trends of the art and culture sector, specifically like Women and Child department and the SC and ST department. Expenditure for culture runs across various ministries in the government of India. What we did was stick to Ministry of Culture, though we did arrive at an approximation of the overall allocation spent by other ministries as well. Just to give a quick background to what the Ministry of Culture's mission is, it's basically preservation, promotion, and dissemination of all forms of art and culture, which includes maintenance and conservation of heritage sites, monuments, archives, giving scholarships, pensions, awards to artists, observation of anniversaries of important national personalities and national days, entering into cultural agreements with foreign countries, etc. So literally it is what holds the face and mirror of the country with respect to art and culture, and therefore it's very significant even in comparison to the state departments of culture. So I'll just go through some quick key findings before we get into the details of numbers. While in the context of pandemic, the scene for the allocation trend for the Ministry of Culture is important to analyze, we must understand that inherently this sector has been very weak and fragile because of very poor allocations and philanthropy in the space. The GOI budget has remained very, very marginal, 2,688 crores, which is about 0.07% in financial year 2021-22, but has been consistently about 0.1% over the last decade, like really small amounts. Mid-year revision last year during the lockdown, we saw that the budget for art and culture was slashed down literally by 21%. That's about 900 crores of the 2,688 crores. And this at a time when the industry survey, which was done by FICCI and the others, very clearly said that just because of the pandemic, 22% of the creative sector was forecast to lose 75% of its income and 16% faces closure. According to subsequent surveys that they have done in the space, we have seen the closure rates increase to about 40 to 50%. This is clearly in sharp contrast to what other countries, both in Asia and Europe, have done, whether it's China, UK, Korea, Singapore, and Australia. They've actually increased their budget during the pandemic for art and culture and given many, many relief packages of varied kinds. We'll look at simple ones later on. Apart from the low allocation, they have been compounded very much like other ministries in the government of India, if we analyze their budgets, by delays in fund releases, and more importantly, mounting vacancies, which range from 30 to 70% across the board in all cultural institutions manned by the government of India. This adversely affects planning for activities, actual expenditures, and therefore allocations again, making it a very vicious cycle of investment in the sector. Intangible culture, just to give a quick perspective, there are two forms of culture, three actually, but let's talk about the two which the Ministry of Culture takes more onus on. One is the tangible culture, the second is intangible. Tangible is basically everything related to museums, the heritage, ASI properties and things like that. Intangibles are artists, art performances, anything which you can't touch and feel, as the word intangible says. Intangible culture, which basically supports artists through pensions and scholarships, has received the least support from GOI. That has been the case and a trend over the years, but specifically in the pandemic, the maximum cuts, when the cuts happen, the maximum cuts happen in the intangible sector. This is extremely critical because it affects livelihoods and social security of people working actually in the sector and keeping it alive, and also increases the crisis of many aspects of Indian culture, which have already gone extinct or getting extinct. There's also a resource crunch in the culture sector, which was aggregated during the pandemic, primarily because of lack of government data and support for ensuring to find out what the data is. At least we within the sector have been scrambling to find out where the artists are, who are most affected, how we can help them. That kind of support has not come through any other social sector schemes for specifically artists. While this kind of data collection, I must say, for allied spaces like culture and tourism and handicrafts has taken place. Beyond its own allocation, the government of India has significantly failed in enabling conditions for even the private sector to invest. In 2016-17, the investment in the private sector was about 306 crores. That's dropped to 48 crores in 1920. Not that 306 was very vast, but the drop is significant. The 306 crores spike that we saw took place because of the Statue of Unity that Government of India was building. And once that was done, the investment in the sector basically came to a notch. I'll go through some specific numbers. I'm not taking you through the entire budget guide, leave it for you to, for everyone to go back to it and think through it. But I'll take you through some very important, significant numbers. As I mentioned before, if you look at the bars here, which basically indicate the allocations against the total budget, the relative trend has been very, very dismal at 0.11 on an average. But the last 5 years have been even more disappointing. And this year, we saw the least allocation of 0.07% in the last decade, time when the sector actually needed more. So the last 5 years has seen a declining trend, and the last 2-3 years, especially during the pandemic, have seen a worsening trend. As a percentage of GDP, which you see is the red line, same as a scenario, it's really poor allocations and pretty stagnant or following a declining trend. I must also add here that the kind of support internationally we have seen has come in the form of loans, grants. Singapore, for instance, gave rental waivers to art organizations. They've also come in the form of capital investments and loans. Nobody's asking for freebies in the sector, but a lot more support from the government in varied formats could help the sector not cripple down the way it has been especially in the last 2 years. There is also money that is spent by other ministries, as I had mentioned before. We did a rough estimate and calculation by including about 7 other ministries, including the money which is spent on educational institutions like FTII, expenditure by the Information and Broadcasting Department, expenditure which is done by the International Relations, and it comes to about 4,578 crores in the year 2021-22, which is about. So basically, other ministries spend about 35 to 40% of the total expenditure. The Ministry of Culture spends 60% on culture and art. Notwithstanding inflation, there has this allocation to other ministries has also seen a dip of 26% from the last year to this year. We'll also quickly look at the trends for cultures across states. We didn't take too many states. That was too expansive a scope for us. We took in a combination of states which depend on tourism tourism as an important economic driver, and few others which are big states. And basically, the expenditure by states mirror what the central government spends. But it also shows a trend that has been noticed in OECD countries, where the subnational governments, which is the states, bear about 60% of the expenditure on art and culture in comparison to the central government or the federal. However, it's interesting to note that amongst the states like Delhi, Kerala, and Goa, ones who depend more on tourism, they tend to expend a little more on art and culture. Not that it's enough, but just to say that that's some kind of a sentence there. I think one very important systemic issue is that there is complete lack of transparency and accountability and coordination between the center and the state cultural department. One of the more important, this comes up in various spaces, like for instance, the National Mission of Libraries has failed in delivering its objectives. The National Mission of Cultural Mapping, which I'll come down to later, has also terribly failed because of this lack of state coordination. And I'll come to the cultural mapping later as we talk about intangible culture. But more importantly, for something like disbursing pensions. So the process is that the people who are beneficiaries for the pensions and scholarships, those names has to first come from the state government to the center, especially in the case of pensions. And then the center reviews it and then disburses it back to the artist directly. It's interesting that 30%, that only 3 states basically get the entirety of all the grants that are allocated for pensions by the central government. And those 3 states are Odisha, Maharashtra, and Telangana. Now, the central government puts the buck on the states, saying that the states do not respond on time by giving details of the beneficiaries, but it's also true that the central government doesn't take any proactive action to reach out to the states or arrive at other mechanisms to find what's the true status of pension beneficiaries. So there's like this two-way issue of passing the buck, which happens between the center and state. One of the reasons for this is that if we look at, if you look at the entire decentralization space of funds, functionaries, I've got the third F, but the funds and functionaries and the functions are not very clearly delineated between the center and state. Even if you look back at what is given as role of the center, they only clearly specify about maintaining ASI properties, but nothing really else. Everything is too generic. So the very definition of what the functions is for the center and state needs much deeper clarity if we want to resolve the issue of bringing better state coordination and bringing transparency. I want to just dig a little deeper into the allocation and expenditure by MOC. For those who may have engaged with budgetary data before, there are 3 basic issues: allocation, releases, and expenditures. The 3 important phases in the way the government releases its tranches across the 4 financial quarters. Now, allocation is the total amount which they budget to give in the beginning of the year. We saw that was just about 0.1%, and the lowest was this year at 0.07. And that trend in terms of absolute numbers I have listed on this graph. But what's also interesting is that the releases, especially in the last 4 years, have gone through a dip, which means to say that the revised expenditure, which takes place from the government of India after whatever is allocated, has been seeing a dip. A primary cause for that is that the releases by the Ministry of Finance, Government of India, does not happen on time in the first 2-3 quarters, leaving to majority of the expenditure happening in the last quarter. And that means that you can't efficiently or effectively spend the full money. And so you end up spending less than what is your revised estimate. And that re-impacts your allocation, which is a vicious cycle I was talking about. I want to bring some shocking facts to this. I did mention this in the beginning as well. While this has been happening more extensively in the last 4 years, in 2021 and 1920, we saw like super dips. Especially in 2021, the budget was cut down from an estimate of 3150 to 2212 crores, the revised estimate, which was about a dip of 950 odd crores. And now the allocation has been based on this revised estimate. Therefore, it's about 2,688 crores in 2021-22. So I hope this vicious cycle has kind of been explained. Well, so we have varied, unlike, we do have this across many other sectors like education and health as well, but the culture sector works a little differently, as in we have many societies who get grants or some institutions which are directly managed, like ASI or the main museum which we have in Delhi, the National Archives, a few of them, National Gallery of Modern Art. Some of them are directly managed and run by the central government, but many other institutions like your Sangeet Natak Academy, all of them are societies and they're given grants. It's interesting to know that whether they are societies, which technically have complete independence, and there was a reason to do that. You want to have full arm distance. When it comes to culture, you do not want to intervene as a government and emphasize on what's right and wrong. And that's why these societies were created. It's interesting that whether it's academies or institutions manned by the government, they are headless. They do not have the key people. And you have at least anywhere between 30 to 70% vacancies. This space really adversely impacts the way the programs are effectively executed. It also impacts societies when they don't have enough grants to be able to run good audits, run programs on time. You make a certain plan thinking that you will get certain amount of budget. And that reminds me that if that only about 10% of the budget that's asked by most institutions is given back by the government of India, is approved by the government of India. I'll just pick up this fact for you. According to the 12th five-year plan, about 7,275 crores was allocated against a demand of 18,669. Only 70% of the projected demand was allocated. So you basically, the institutions make their own projected demands and they only get about 70%. Maybe let's assume that they have gotten used to getting only a paltry sum of what they project. But even that paltry sum does not get the actual releases on time. And then on top of it, you have vacancies, and that really puts a stress on a lot of organizations, and the effectiveness goes for a toss. So when we say, kya ho kya raha hai art and culture mein, that typically happens primarily because there is not any effective implementation mechanisms in place and not enough people to actually take care of it. A second more key qualitative aspect about is there's no culture cadre. There is no sensitivity to what and how art and culture programs and policies need to be delivered. And while there has been a demand for the same, there's really little that's been done. At least 25 years back, the IAS Vasuri program used to have a segment in art and culture training, manned and led by cultural practitioners. That's been completely taken off the wing, that little bit of training and sensitivity also. The MOC, when it was questioned in the parliament, responded by suggesting to the CCRT that they could design training programs for building a cultural cadre. But it's interesting to note that 1/3 of the sanction posts in CCRT itself are pending. So for them to have the capacity to build training programs itself is in question when there are many other functions to take care of. Lesser emphasis on intangible culture. So I had mentioned before that there is very the intangible culture are the people who manage, who are the artists, who are the artisans, who actually take forth the knowledge of many generations and what they build over a period of time to next generations. There absolutely no infrastructure investment in form of institutions and educational spaces that can take forward this knowledge in a systematic way, nor any kind of support that is provided, which is substantial enough to keep this alive. I'll just quickly take you through this graph. I mean, I'm not going to take you through the numbers, but you can see from the graph that maximum allocations go to museums and ASI. And these two schemes, which are the support for academies and Kala Sanskriti Vikas Yojana, which I will kind of explain to you later, receives only 20% of the budget. And during the pandemic, when the budget cuts happened, these were the two sections which received the maximum cut. If you notice, it's it has falling trend over the years. So this has been an issue with support for intangible culture. Another important aspect of intangible culture is actually libraries and archives and manuscripts. These are pretty much defined as tangible culture, but in many ways help in preserving the artistic knowledge, as you say. That has literally been reduced to a paltry few crores now, and that only typically manages whatever little staff, etc., that is required to keep the institutions alive. And we have a wealth of information that's resting in these places, which, if bridged together with the intangible culture policies, can actually bring a lot of innovation in the way arts and culture is practiced on a day-to-day basis. So I'll just delve a little bit into the intangible culture. The Kala Sanskriti Vikas Yojana is basically the one which takes care of your schemes on pensions, on scholarships, on fellowships and grants, production grants, and things like that, like what we see with bigger institutions like NGOs like IFA, people in the sector are aware of. So that's what they do. They also give institutions like Sahapedia has gotten grants for their own fellowship programs in collaboration with Ministry of Culture. They also support institutions and NGOs for promoting any work related to art and culture. And it receives about the lowest amount of the allocations in the entire pool, and that's about 7.5% of the total culture and art expenditure. And it's some of the ailing things are what that basically poor allocations mean is that you have, obviously, if you have lesser pool of money, you're going to have lesser number of scholarships and fellowships being given. I'll just give you some examples. In 2016-17, only 283 scholars all over India were identified for the award of young artists in different cultural fields. And that's about what even Telangana gives. as a state to its own scholars. Old age pension was paid to 4,120 artists in 2018-19, and this has dropped further to 3,133 in 1920 and further to about 2,900 odd in the year 2021. There's also an issue of fund release, which I had told you about. Expenditure under KSYY till Jan 2020 was mere 45% of its budget in 2019-20, and this poor fund release leads to cut in the revised expenditure because you can't spend what has not been given to you, and the government of India just reduces your RE, and because they reduce your revised estimate, what you spend in the last quarter is also reduced, and therefore the allocations reduce. And this, because its original allocation percentage itself is less, the percentage keeps reducing what is allocated towards intangible sector. There's also an issue of poor fund utilization. Everything is not because of releases and revised estimates. The KSPY scheme performs the worst. It only spends 66% of what is allocated to it. It's interesting that when the government when the Ministry of Culture was asked by the committee, the Standing Committee on Art and Culture, as to why the payouts have not been happening on time, or what is the statistics of this late payouts, it says that between 2013 and 18, under the senior and junior fellowship scheme, only 1,345 candidates got selected over a period of 5 years. Only 1,300 candidates got, out of which 1,100 candidates, money has not been released until 2019. And the reason, which I feel is like extremely irresponsible to cite, but was cited, was that the committee which meets to actually give these or approve these grants had not met until 2020-21. So that's the state of affairs with respect to fund release and allocations within the department itself. There is an extreme delay in releases of funds, and if you look at sanctions orders, even in as up to February 2021, the trend continues. The National Mission on Cultural Mapping. So for people who may not be aware about cultural mapping, it's a UNESCO recognized tool. It's a data collection tool for basically knowing, it's a simple way of saying that we want to know who we are, what we are, to be able to know what kind of interventions we want to do and to for whom. So the cultural mapping is a way of determining what are our intangible cultures, tangible cultures, natural resources, geotagging them, and then, kind of arriving at policies which will suit in the preservation and promotion of these spaces. The way the cultural mapping started was within very extensive, it's a beautiful plan that they had created. They allocated a budget of about 3,000 crores across the country. And we will talk about the fund utilization. The process they basically adopted went up to state governments, and at district levels, they started having some competitions for the same dance forms or music forms without having any sensitivity of actually arriving at a census, like a very cohesive, strong census on the arts and culture sector itself. With respect to the amount of expenditure, about 42.78. So the entire outlay was decided, the plan was made in 2015, but the scheme itself came into action only in 2017. Only 42.78 crore was allocated in 2018-19, of which only about 1 crore has been spent until now. So in totality, it just appears that I think I'll come to that in the key takeaways, but it just makes me very exhaustive because cultural mapping is such an extensive exercise that no single NGO of this country or private institution by itself can map it. And therefore you need a central organization with a lot of state support to be actually running this effectively. That's not what's happened, and it's been a clear reflection of the failure. A lot of organizations working in the sector have reached out to the government of India to revive it and make it stronger, but less said than better. Academies are the ones which, as I said, run most of our programs for artists and are great. For most artists in this space, it is a great career move, or at least seen as a great career move in terms of receiving awards or scholarships from academies. They receive about 11% of the total budget, 11 to 13%, and a big issue is that there is no coordination between state academies and central academies, and there's complete lack of accountability and transparency. A lot of committees that have been made before by the government of India to study the functioning of academies have said that, and we must have read this in papers on and off, and they have been making these comments that the way artists are given awards and scholarships are based on random likability or understanding or a poor understanding. It also is reflective of the kind of members who are first fixed in place to the committee itself. Some of the key takeaways for us analyzing this report is that this completely, I mean, it's obvious that in a sector which cannot completely go into a sustainability mode where everything can happen on a PPP mode and we can make everything monetized and everything happen successfully, we're getting enough money for everything, it does need philanthropy. There is complete lack of adequate and efficient funding in the sector. And it's a critical reason for that is just complete failure of administrator or lack of administrative and political will. And it's not like institutions have not gone to them. A large part of the buck also has to go to the culture sector itself. While it's a very big sector, I know the FICCI report says it places its valuation in many billions of dollars. And it does contribute in a big way to the economy and GDP of the country and many states. But it's taken for granted, also because there is absence of a common platform, lack of adequate data across the diverse art forms and cultures, which makes it very difficult, to get visibility to the issues of the sector and understanding and accountability, therefore, for the questions and solutions that one can arrive at. This is about it. I haven't completely presented the entire guide because I wanted, it's a lot of information, especially for people who may not, I was assuming it's going to be a lot of non-art and culture sector crowd. So I have just presented about 50% of the guide. Please go download and download the guide and read the rest of it. We have a lot more information on the museums and the tangible culture and how that's working. Also, if you have any questions and discussion, we can take it now, but you can also email me on this ID. Nitya, I have this PPT that you can circulate so amongst whoever is present here. And I'm going to stop at this point for questions and any discussions people may have.
Great, thank you so much for that, Padma Priya. I think this is a very interesting sort of take on a very different sector, which often, as you mentioned rightly, so often gets neglected. And it was interesting to see what the repercussions of that is in the midst of a health crisis. So maybe we'll pause to see if there are any questions from the audience. Please go ahead, Rohan. Feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video and ask your question.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me, Padma Priya?
Yes, hi.
Yeah, this was, I want to say this was shocking, but it doesn't even seem to be, it's, we know it's been the state. We've seen like infrastructure, particularly in something like arts and culture, which has forever been fairly understaffed, under-resourced. Across several other sectors, particularly health, the big story from India has been about the society showing up for each other, right? Like we've seen that across oxygen cylinders, medicines, hospital beds, Twitter, Instagram, and I'm guessing this will have long-standing repercussions across like even other sectors of health, maternal health, education, etc., where people will figure that actually the state is missing and we need to help ourselves out in some way. Really, actually, I mean, also since the Prime Minister actually calls for it, for people to help each other out, right? I'm curious about how this got reflected in the arts and culture space, particularly in the last year. There were magicians in Delhi who I was in touch with from Katputli colony that had to move away and then had to move away again. And I was trying to help them out in trying to figure out how to pivot, particularly to digital spaces. I mean, anyway, they were on the margins of the city and physical life. And then the lockdown really took even that away from them. And I was hoping if you could share some stories of like communities coming together and self-organizing to either pivot or like find other sort of sources of income, support, etc. Yeah, like that could possibly tell us like what directions outside of this, because I mean, what you also described was that it's not just this year. We've seen, I mean, it seems like it's systemic. It's happened for decades now, right? So where else to look?
Yeah. So that's a great point. I mean, the culture sector has been very fragmented, and one very positive space for all of us is that it's finally coming together. It's almost like that as a way of resonating and finding solutions for a lot from whom we have all learned from as well. Yeah. Um, so I'll give you some instances of these. What started off as a simple WhatsApp group conversation between two craftspeople led to the Crafts Collective being made. Now it has actually collaborated with many of the top online brands to bring artisan work to the fore, and they have been helping them on training programs on how to make their textiles, how to picture them, how to present them. If they can't do it, kind of finding modal points within their spaces. Though technically there are nodal institutions in all these districts and taluks for which are called craft councils by the government and the state government, both central and state. But most of them are ineffective and very dated. So like you'll have an old computer or things like that. So, and many of these artisans don't have smartphones. So the Craft Collective is a completely voluntary collective which came together primarily to support artisans and craftspeople in the textile and the craft space, right? From your toys and things like that. Now the thing with that is that, and they also, by the way, initially started not to make a business model out of it for the artisans, but first they started up with giving them provisions and rations, just like we did during the lockdown. And then they said, okay, what next? Because we can't keep giving rations to people, because that's not something we can afford to do over a period of time. And we can direct some kind of fundraising, but how long, right? And the fact is that philanthropy in the art and culture is very difficult to get. Numbers don't substantiate in the long run for the private sector compared to health and education, for instance. In the artist space, we had a lot of performances which were happening online for fundraising from platforms like Team Arts. I'm not sure. Sanjoy Roy's organization. Teamworks did some.
The ones that do the Jaipur Literature Festival.
Yeah, who run the Jaipur Lit Fest have been running massive fundraising programs. We have TM Krishna. I myself was part of TM Krishna's own fundraising organization for working for temple artists. There have been organizations in Karnataka who've been doing that with temple artists. Similarly with Rajasthan, Ishamuddin Saab, who's ISPAT you'll be talking about. Some of my own friends have been like supporting by organizing baitaks and stuff like that. You know, all of these are great stories, but I again come back to this. We can kind of do a makeshift, and they're very heartening stories. Okay, and there's no space to come back to saying that. And I'm being in cinema. Let me tell you also that while it's more flourishing with respect to a few people in the sector, a large section of the sector is actually not so economically well off. And we've had organizations like Sinta, etc., who have been and are continuing to work. This is the Actors Association in Bombay, who work for most of the Bollywood spaces, whether all the Actors Association in Kerala, the Directors Association, there have been fundraising programs for supporting lightmen, camera people, car drivers, cooks, and all of those sectors that we don't think constitute cinema, and we think is a very rich or economically well-off space. So all of this is great, but I also still feel that these are makeshift arrangements, and the sector critically lacks, just like in health. Like, okay, you can do some jugaad and get a few oxygen cylinders and concentrators. You can stock it up. You can make sure it's part of your first aid kit forever in your house. You can make sure you get masks, but how many of these people can actually afford it? How long and sustainably can people like you and me make interventions to have this, done sustainably? This is even more critical in arts and culture because most of us are practitioners ourselves. I'm an artist myself. I want to go out and spend time doing my art. If I spend time only supporting other artists, I'm not going to have time to do my art. And that's one of the reasons why even art and culture as a policy and space is terribly affected compared to other sectors like gender, etc., where you say, hey, I am doing successfully, but I can start a gender NGO and do some gender studies. I'm not saying we're doing very well there, but at least we have got much far off there because it can be unified as a sector. Even something like cultural mapping, when I have been leading in India with Sahapedia, and such an effort to get especially the artists to come and archive their own work. And that's very important as part of keeping our oral literature going. And therefore, it's very important for the government to step in here. It is a sector which has to have government support. There is no two ways about it. Unfortunately, whether it is Delhi, Kerala, so-called progressive state governments, or the central government, which has been consistently non-progressive, not just the current government, but even in the past governments, which I say it's agnostic. It's been, the culture sector has been agnostically impacted by the political parties across the span, primarily because they do not systematically resolve the issues. No artist wants a place where you're giving them, doling them out $5,000 a month. That's not going to support them in the long run. It will support them in giving some base and ration party, and that's important to resolve. But you need much more. If you can have MNREGA schemes for laborers, I think a lot of our artisans and artists are actually falling under that category. They may be highly skilled comparatively. Why don't we have something as simple? I think T.N. Krishna had brought this up, that we should have a counterfactual to MNREGA for artists as well. If they're temple artists, then they're attached to temples or to festivals and performances. Let's keep that alive, because I think a lot of people who may be like arguing like, okay, I'm here dying, I don't have, and I definitely agree that it's extremely important that we have medical facilities. But mental health, social network is an extremely key factor in the way we see ourselves and work with ourselves. In every mapping project that I have been part of, in every space and place I have been part of, people get a lot of relief in being part of such exercises. And it's basically a way of, we all earn money at the end of the day to have a good life. And that's what art and culture gives in daily practice. This is not just about supporting artists and artisans, but also supporting your own daily practice of culture. There's very little that we do to contribute to that. And that's where I see where the gap is. And yes, it's very heartening to and happy to see that the sector has come together in ways never before. We are working with UNESCO on a report actually now to bring out through narrative storytelling the impact of COVID on the pandemic on their lives, pre and post COVID. I don't know what's post COVID, but during this time. And there has been this effort by FICCI and Artex. Then we have done this budget brief out of sheer will of wanting to get some data in. And these are little efforts. The Crafts Collective has been collecting data and trying to geotag each craftsman or craftsperson in India. And it's really heartening to see the kind of efforts these people are doing, but this is only a stopgap arrangement. It'll never resolve the much long-term solutions that the sector needs to get out of its state of crippledness. I hope that answers your question, Rohan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Rohan, and thank you for the response, Padmapriya. I think you quite highlighted upon many aspects of, as you rightly mentioned, people coming together, but that inevitably not being enough. And as Rohan rightly pointed out, I think that's a sad reality of the arts and culture sector in India. I'll just see if we have time for maybe one more question. I just like to see if anybody else would like to share anything, make a comment. It needn't be a question. It could also just be a comment or anything of that sort.
Is there anybody else? But I want to just add to one more point.
Yes, please go ahead.
Rohan had raised this question about going online. Unlike Netflix, which has also not been a very big boon for people in the cinema space, because I mean I've been in it and I understand the repercussions that it's much more happier space. But going online has not been very helpful for two reasons. One is that the aesthetics of the art forms that Indian art forms have are very contrarian to what the online space can give. Yes, there have been some interesting private initiatives to both make money and monetize the entire activity, and also present quality programs, whether it is NCPA, and I know this Bangalore-based startup, which is doing a lot of work in trying to actually getting quality performances on screen and people actually paying for the tickets for the same. But really, it hasn't helped in, it doesn't cover a wide variety of art forms that we have. So that can help a few, but it's not going to really support the Darabar festival as well. Darbar festival, sorry. There's also the New York arts, something, Indian arts, something which does, but again, it's focused on certain art forms. And so, I mean, going online is not a complete solution. I know, for instance, the work with Ishamuddin does with, or Ishamuddin and Ispat does from Katputli colony, who now live in some weird part of Delhi, Gurgaon, Faridabad, I don't know which part. That's something which, even if I'm, I mean, I need to be like a really super smart filmmaker with very extremely strong capabilities of filmmaking, which even then you're not going to have that fun which you have seeing them doing the kind of street magic and street theater kind of work that they do. So one is that the platforms can be enabled to include more, but it again, we'll have to come. I don't know. I mean, it's a very difficult world to imagine when they will be post-COVID, and then we will be able to cross beyond moving to digital to physical again. One failed experiment of going physical was the Surya Dance Festival, which happens in Kerala in Trivandrum. It's one of the longest art festivals, physical art festivals, and they reopened their theaters. And in spite of having some of the biggest names on the podium, and at a time when the COVID spread was not very high, the attendance was very minimal. Even for more popular events, and that primarily could be because we've all become lazy in a way of getting entertainment in our couch. And so, I mean, we don't know where the sector is going. I think this is time when we all need to come together and kind of find solutions for varied art forms. It may be easier still for the arts and crafts, like it has been comparatively for them. But the story for traditional performing arts is more complicated. Visual arts, on the other hand, has done far more interesting collaborations and work, including the work which is happening in Kerala with respect to, I don't know what they're being managed by the Kochi Biennale guys, but something else that they've been doing. But a lot of other museums and arts organizations in the visual art space have been going online, and it totally makes sense also because at the end, if you can create the impact of the visual art online, then then there will be takers to buy that art piece.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Padmapriya. I just maybe wanted to share like a small anecdote about, I think, something that I experienced, I think, during the first wave, which seems like years ago now, actually, but it was just a mere year ago. I remember just as the wave was kind of beginning and people started getting sequestered into their homes, I saw a lot of, maybe that's because of the algorithms and kind of the content I do consume on my laptop. I started seeing a lot of advertisements about like theater and the Royal London College theaters and stuff. And it was a very interesting experience. I actually signed up and you could buy tickets for kind of supporting these theaters. And I remember 2 plays with my mom, one about Streetcar Named Desire and one about Gandhi. And I remember that was such a different experience of experiencing theater and art forms in different ways. So I think, I never thought that I would pay like a ticket to watch. Like you said, then you automatically start comparing it with Netflix, right? Like which post-production is so clean. It's like everything is in set. When you're watching theater, it's also a lot about the experience and the atmosphere with which you go there. And I was sitting in my living room or in my bedroom and I was watching it, and it was a very surreal experience. But I think I did enjoy it, I guess, maybe because there were 2 plays I hadn't seen before. But I think just maybe coming back to your point about how we're kind of at the beginning or maybe like even in the middle of these crossroads where we don't actually know what the future of this space is, right? That I think there are also many different experiences which often you associate arts and culture, as you rightly mentioned, with being very tangible often, right? But now it seems to be moving into a completely different space where it's becoming very Netflix-esque, for lack of a better word. And I think maybe that will also have a completely different kind of audience, different kind of production, different kinds of people involved in that kind of production making. I guess I'm being a little hopeful because I'm like an audience member and I don't I'm probably not behind the stage and I don't know how much effort that actually takes. And as you rightly mentioned, I think many of the sort of performers or creators in the Indian space aren't as tech savvy as, let's say, like the Royal Theatre in London, right? Like they don't have those kind of digital skills or even like technology access. But that's just a hypothesis. I could be grossly wrong and underestimating their abilities. But it'd be interesting to see, I think, how the arts and culture space, if at all, manages to kind of cement their space digitally. That would be, for me, I think that seems quite interesting. But I don't know, maybe I'm in the minority here. So thank you so much, Padmapriya, for your time. I'm just gonna quickly wrap up with just sharing just the last slide about what happens next. So thank you everybody else who joined us as well. Like, we acknowledge that it's a really tough time and there might be other things going on, but thank you for taking out the time and being patient and listening in, and just being part of this really interesting conversation. I would also like to plug in that at 12, oops, I think I see, but it's 2 minutes over. We have another very interesting showcase by Jan Sahas, which looks at 1 year of COVID-19. Are we seeing a shift in patterns of internal migration? So that would be very interesting. I'll just request one of my colleagues to just drop in the link in the chat box. So you might just have to go to a different Zoom room, but I would just request them to leave that in the chat box so you can do so seamlessly. And then 2 plenaries, one on adolescent vulnerabilities and building resilient support systems, as well as the future of data systems, has been postponed to the 28th of May. We will share more details with you closer to time, of course. And thank you everyone for joining, and stay safe.